Long live your turtle here, and in this video we're gonna make this super easy DIY glass aquarium cover. It's functional too. Alright, so this is my 75-gallon aquarium. It's a turtle tank like I mentioned. This is my female red-eared slider Moses, and she's accompanied by 4 convict cichlids and a suckerfish in here. So you'll see on the left top of my tank, I have a basking area. Again, this is a turtle tank, so my turtle needs to get out of the water and bask. So this basking area covers half the tank on top of the tank right over here. If you're interested in making a basking dock like this, check out a link in the description. I show you exactly how to build this step by step. Otherwise, we're focusing on the other side of the tank, and that's the open area here. Now, this is applicable to all tanks to have a glass cover. It's very common for aquariums to have glass covers. For a turtle specifically, it prevents them from escaping. Since I have this above tank basking platform, the whole tank is full of water. So if this side were to be left open, my turtle would easily be able to climb out and plunge a couple feet down onto the floor, which obviously you absolutely never want to happen. So before this cover, I actually had another DIY project cover that I had on this side of the tank. Now that was made of egg crate and acrylic. Unfortunately, I used really thin acrylic and the hinged panel ended up warping because of the moisture from the tank, and it broke off the hinges, so that hinged panel no longer worked. So it was back to the drawing board on how to make a great DIY aquarium cover. Now I know you're saying there's tons of products that are actually sold for specific tanks, just like this one, that function as perfect glass covers, like the one I made. However, I have a turtle tank, and as you can see, I have one side completely covered by this basking area, and the other side needs to be covered by a glass cover. And the problem with me buying something online is those come in packs of 2. Because of the design of this tank, there's a trim piece down the middle, and it takes 2 glass panels in order to cover the full size of your tank. So I need to buy 2 glass panels. They're sold as 2 glass panels online or at the store, which makes them quite a bit more expensive, around $45 to $50. Now, I don't want to spend that much for my new cover here. So my goal of this project was, number 1, it needs to be a similar price to what 1 glass panel would be on the market. Number 2, it needs to function just like these glass panels you'd buy at a store. And number 3, I want to make this a super easy DIY project. What I mean by that is it takes no power tools, it takes very few actual tools, and you can make this relatively quickly. And that way, I hope it reaches a lot more of you viewers looking to make something really easy without all sorts of machines, tools, and other things that a lot of people don't have. This DIY cover was so easy to make. Now, to talk about the cover a little bit more before I show you exactly how to build this, like I said, it's really easy to make. And why is that? Because it takes 3 parts. It takes glass, it takes these little acrylic hinges, and it takes this little cabinet handle here. That is all this is made out of. So it's really, really easy to put together because it takes so few pieces. Now this type of cover fits tanks that are probably the most common style tanks, which are tanks that have this black trim here. And for my 75-gallon, it has a brace in the middle to kind of break it up and give support in the middle here. And it has this little lip around the sides that lets you kind of recess a glass cover like this into the top of your tank. So it's only fair to compare this to what you can buy from your local pet store or a PetSmart or a Petco or even just online at Amazon. And the biggest thing to compare obviously is price. Now, like I said, when you buy these covers from your pet stores or online, it's going to come in a set of 2 for a 75-gallon aquarium like I have here. So I don't want to buy 2 because I don't need to, and I don't want to pay all that money for that extra one. Now I got this down to $27, and I think that's a great price compared to the $45 I was finding online and probably way more expensive in store. To caveat that doesn't include any tools, but again, there's very minimal tools, and we'll get to that when I show you exactly how to build this. But what we have here is $13 panel glass, we have $8 acrylic hinges, and we have a $2 little handle here, and $6 for the adhesive I used. And that's it. That's all you're going to be paying for, and you'll use the adhesive for other things, so you can almost say that's not even a part of the cost, and this is more like $22. So I know I'm talking a lot and you want to get to the build, but a couple more things I want to note on this glass cover is its durability comparison to what's on the market. There is a little downgrade in the type of glass I'm using. This is just normal pane glass as opposed to a tempered glass that you would typically get when you buy your online or in-store glass covers. And tempered glass is quite a bit stronger than regular glass, doesn't shatter as easily, and in general is just going to be a better option. But I think just having this normal glass is going to be perfectly adequate. My turtle doesn't typically try to escape, nor will it just smash into the top here. So I still think this is a great option for an aquarium. And the last thing I want to talk about real quick is functionality. In a typical aquarium cover that you're going to buy, you're going to have a living hinge, which is basically just a plastic hinge that has no discontinuities, and it does what a hinge does, just like this does, and it can open and close, and it can go all the way back like that. Now, I just showed you that this cover with its little acrylic hinges can do the exact same thing, and it was only $8. If you're trying to get a living hinge online to replicate what you'll get in the store, it's about $15 to $20, so it's quite a bit more expensive to try to go that route. I was trying to save money here and make it a really easy DIY project, so I got these acrylic hinges that work just fine. Now, in the back here, you'll see that there are some gaps for some filtration, and that's our last functional piece to talk about here. I designed this so that there would be gaps back here. You'll see how that is done in the build itself. I did this specific for my tank. It fits everything perfectly, but if you have different filtration setups, different tube diameters, different things going into your tank, then I would suggest making up your own little design back here that's going to accommodate that. Otherwise, this is the DIY glass aquarium cover. It's super easy to build. Now, if you stuck around this long, I can only assume that you want to build this or you want to see how I built it. So first of all, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you like what you're seeing so far. Otherwise, let's get to building this cool, super easy cover. All right, so this is the table with everything you're going to need for this project. Most of it is just tools and safety gear. The rest is going to be what you're going to use to build your cover. So the first thing you're going to need, and the most important part, is your glass. This will act as your cover, and what I use in this is a 3/32 inch pane of glass. I think it is a 30 by 24 inch piece because that's going to be enough to match the footprint that I need for my purposes on my tank. It's going to make that one cover that I've shown before. Next thing you're going to need is a big straight edge. I use this big metal straight edge square there. You can use a piece of wood if you want. Of course, you want your PPE, you want your gloves and your safety glasses. This is your cutting tool to cut your glass, super cheap and simple. You got a tape measure, you got your plastic acrylic hinges. I got those off Amazon. You got your E6000 adhesive. This is great for gluing that plastic to glass. Duct tape, didn't use it, ignore it. You're gonna need your little cabinet handle. You can choose whatever you want here. I chose this really cheap one. And then a fine grit sandpaper. This is 180p. All right, so first thing to do is take your glass and give it a good cleaning. You'll notice I have 2 panes of glass here, and that's because I've already cut it once because I wanted to practice using the little cutting tool before I told you guys how to use it, and it was really easy. So that's good news for you. All right, so once you have your glass clean, it's time to cut it to size. So for depth of your tank, I went to 14.25 inches. I didn't go the whole 16.25 inches, which is the full depth of the tank, to that plastic trim because I wanted to leave a little space for the filtration. And then for width-wise, you're gonna do that full width of that side of the trim of your tank. I'm showing you here that I'm putting my arm where I want the hinged panel to be because I want my whole arm to be able to fit in the tank really easily. So I ended up doing 6 inches here. As you can see, I'm marking with a little permanent marker. You can easily wipe this off glass just using a basic cleaner. Don't worry about that being a permanent mark, but I'm marking off the panel size here. With my mark set, it's time to cut. This is our little cutting tool. It's a little steel ball with little beveled edges, and it's basically going to notch a little tiny gouge into your glass as you drag it across the glass. It sounds like it'll be really fragile and really hard, but it's actually really, really easy, even easier than working with acrylic scoring knives. So you just line it up with a straight edge and you just put a decent amount of pressure down. You're going to hear it crackling, and you just kind of drag it along that straight edge. You're only going to do one pass here. You don't want to do multiple passes. Don't know what that little arm frivol there was, but once you have that scored, it's time to break it into 2 pieces. Now, again, this seems really daunting possibly to you, but it's really easy. This is a long stretch that I made, so it was difficult to do with just my hands putting pressure on one side to snap it, which can be done for much smaller pieces, smaller cuts. But I'm actually going to end up using the edge of my table here to help me put enough pressure to make this a clean cut. As you can see, cracks off really easily, perfect line. Really love working with glass over acrylic after realizing how easy this actually is. And there you go. Once you made that cut, it's going to be a really sharp edge, and also when you buy this glass, it just has really sharp edges. So it's important to make sure that you remember to give a nice little sanding to those corners and just round them out a little bit, because you don't want to hurt yourself, you don't want to hurt your turtle in your tank or any inhabitants that might come and hit this by accident. So give it a nice sanding. Try not to skimp here because everyone hates sanding, but just do it. It'll be worth it in the end. Now that we have our hinge panel and our main panel all sized up, it's time to install our little acrylic hinges. So we're going to be using that E6000 adhesive, which is a great adhesive for kind of projects like this where you're attaching an acrylic to a glass. So this is a really strong glue. It won't dry instantly. It actually takes 24 hours for a pretty much full cure. 48 hours is what it recommends for an absolutely full cure. So you have some time. It does harden up a little bit while you're working with it over the first 30 minutes. So you can't just leave it for hours and then try to deal with it. But as you can see here, I'm lining up all of our little hinges. So when it comes to orienting these hinges, I'm putting basically a 16th inch gap between the hinge panel of glass and that main panel of glass. And then I'm straddling the hinge between those two panels. I'm putting the larger part of the hinge bracket on the larger panel, that permanent panel, and then the hinge panel is going to have the smaller portion of the bracket. And that's just because I want the stronger portion to be on the base, taking a lot of the load, especially when you pull that thing all the way around. It's going to be stressed a little bit. So I want to make sure the thicker end was on that side. Now this hinge is flat, so you don't really have to worry about overlapping or any issues like that. But you can see I'm just applying a pretty generous amount of the glue on that one flange for the main panel, and then we're going to do the same thing for our hinged panel. And one thing to watch out for here is don't get any of that adhesive in the actual hinge mechanism, because then it will lock up and it won't act as a hinge. It'll act as a solid piece of plastic. You don't want that, and you'll have to break it off, or you might lose that hinge. And I'm using every single hinge that came in the package here because I want to make sure this is strong, so maybe if you've lost one, it would still work. But here I kind of came up with a shortcut method, and I just put glue all the way across to line up with all the hinges that I'm going to put on, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I got a little messy here, so don't be hesitant to clean this up, because like I said, this will dry slowly over time, and it just gets harder and harder the longer you wait to just get rid of any extra glue that you don't want hanging around, because it won't look that good, because it'll definitely show up, because this is a nice clean piece of glass that you're installing all of this on. So do all your hinges, and then you can line up everything at the end, and of course do a little cleanup where you have a little extra glue. I just used a multi-purpose cleaner on a paper towel, and that worked really well. With the hinges all set, you're going to leave those alone for now. It's time to work and focus on the back portion of our cover. If you remember, you're going to have your filtration coming in the back of your cover, but you're also going to have that little glass bridge, which is a stack of 2 pieces of glass that effectively attaches directly to that back main piece of glass, but it also will span to that back plastic trim on your tank, which fills in that big gap that you're going to have that doesn't have any filtration or anything there, so it effectively is an open area that your fish or anything could climb out of. But it also adds stability overall to your cover, because now you're spanning that back end to the back of your tank. So for my design, I'm going to cut a 12-inch by 2 1/8 inch strip of glass that's going to basically butt up to that back edge of the main piece of glass, and then that's going to lay right on the little shelf of the plastic trim in the tank. Now, I have to warn you here, plastic trim on tanks can be a lot different between tank manufacturers and even tanks themselves, because there's a little bit of tolerance that goes into making these kind of plastic pieces. So definitely take your own measurements here. Do not go ahead and just take my measurements as gospel. Use your own measurements, because if you take mine, there's a good chance that it won't fit, because this is a pretty tight fit, because that little ledge that you're resting this glass on isn't that big, and you want to take full advantage of that, and it's pretty easy to miss if you don't take your own actual measurements. But when it comes to cutting these smaller strips of glass, it's the exact same process. Mark off where you want to cut the glass, put a straight edge up to those marks, pull your cutting tool along your straight edge, and then snap off by applying a kind of arching, bending pressure on both sides of that new score, and break off that piece, and there you have it. You have a new little strip of glass. It's so easy to work with glass, and it's actually kind of satisfying when you crack it. Here we go. Beautiful. Don't forget to sand it. All right, once you have that little strip cut, right now it's not attached to anything, it's just floating around. So we're gonna make a little bridge piece, a little spanner, and that is going to basically allow us to attach that smaller strip to our main glass panel. So I made a 3-inch strip here, and that's basically gonna give us a 1-inch overlap onto our main panel, which is gonna be plenty. This glue is pretty strong, and overall this isn't gonna be taking a ton of weight, so that 1 inch is gonna be perfectly adequate for our operation. If you wanted to be a little bit safer, you could even do a 2-inch overlap. Up to you. And of course, sand off all those super sharp edges. You'll thank yourself later, and your turtle will too. With those 2 glass pieces ready to be installed, what you're going to do is put that little 2 1/8 inch piece for me abutting up next to that big panel, and then you're going to put that 3-inch piece overlapping both the big panel and that little strip you just made. For my filtration, as you can see, they're going to be on both sides of this panel. I left plenty of room for the filtration to make it depth-wise into the tank and width-wise, but put a generous amount of that E6000 adhesive on both your little strip and your big panel, and then you're just going to sandwich that top panel on that adhesive, and voila, that's all it took. So here we have it. We have our 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of glass, a bunch of little acrylic hinges, and some adhesive, and this is your entirety of your cover. Super simple, very easy steps. Like I said before, this adhesive takes 24 hours minimum to fully cure, but the package recommends up to 48 hours, so I'd definitely give it that 48 hours since this is going to be over a very moist environment. You want to make sure this is fully cured. So I've let this cure for about an hour or so, and it's definitely pretty sticky, but I want to make sure the hinges aren't sticking. Last but not least, it's time to install our little handle. Now this is going to go, for me, centered on the little hinge panel, and this is basically the cheapest cabinet handle that I could find in the hardware store. It's also relatively light, which I want it to be. Since it's only going to be glued on this glass panel, you're not going to be using any of that mounting hardware with the screws. You're just going to be using that same E6000 adhesive. It's going to work just fine for this application, but just center it near the front of your hinge panel if you want it to be similar to the glass panels that you would buy in the store, and let that glue cure along with everything else. And here's the cover after fully curing the adhesive with all of our little components. You can see the overlap of the hinge on the 2 panels there, and all of them glued in series, and then you can see a little stack up of glass in the back. And that is it, folks. If you have a squeaky hinge, use a little WD-40 just on the hinge. Try not to get it in any adhesive areas because it could remove it, but otherwise we're done.
And there you have it. We have completed and installed our new DIY glass aquarium cover. Like I always say with DIY projects, you can now give yourself a pat on the back for another product that you have made yourself for your aquarium that you can go brag about to all your friends. And then they can roll their eyes. But you know deep down that you're proud of yourself. Thanks for watching. Again, like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions. Long live your turtle!